fairly well received. It's what we need. So we'll see what happens.
As Donald Trump unloads new tariff threats on Canada, the leader of Canada's Conservatives weighs in. I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on The House, our exclusive conversation with Pierre Poilievre about Trump's tariffs. In his first national interview with CBC since becoming party leader, we'll also ask why he thinks he deserves a second chance from voters. Plus, the new head of the Air Force has taken command. We'll talk to her about whether Canada should still be buying U.S. fighter jets and how the military is dealing with extremism. And Mark Carney's new team is in place on Parliament Hill. We've got two folks who have held those top jobs to talk about what challenges lie ahead and whether it's possible to make big cuts in government spending without major layoffs. But we begin with our exclusive interview with Pierre Poilievre. The House is now in session. Donald Trump is at it again. On Thursday night, the U.S. president posted a letter online saying he will impose a 35% tariff on all Canadian goods starting August 1st, though the White House suggests it will only be on goods already facing tariffs. Trump is once again fired up about fentanyl crossing the border and threatening even bigger tariffs if Canada puts in place counter tariffs of its own. Prime Minister Mark Carney hasn't said much yet, promising online to keep defending Canadian workers and businesses and arguing Canada has made, quote, vital progress to stop the scourge of fentanyl in North America. So, how should Canada deal with this latest threat? Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He joined me on Friday from a business in Stettler, Alberta. Pierre Poilievre, welcome to the House.
Thank you for having me.
You have obviously seen these latest threats from Donald Trump. What, if anything, should Canada do differently in response?
Well, we've called on the Prime Minister and the government to allow the International Trade Committee to reconvene right now to have emergency hearings. This will be a chance for all parties to work together on a plan to get back to the table, get a deal done that will end the tariffs, allow Canadians unfettered access again to the American market, get rid of the softwood tariffs, the Buy America rules, the tariffs that have since come in under President Trump, and to as well provide the Americans assurance that we're going to rebuild our military in order to do our part in continental security. I think that is the best way forward in order to get a deal and bring some certainty to the Canadian economy and to our workers.
Your party has suggested that this move to have the committee meet is a way to show support to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, though, does already get a lot of advice when it comes to these negotiations. Obviously, he has his team, the ambassador, cabinet, the premiers of all political stripes, his Canada-US Council. What do you think this would add that he's not already getting?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that he be transparent and demonstrate he has a plan. Originally, he said that he would have a deal at the G7, and then it became a deal by the 21st of July, and now we see it's delayed again to August the 1st. And we want to know what the plan is to put an end to the tariff chaos. Secondly, I think it would allow us to redouble our pressure on the government to reverse the disastrous liberal economic policies that have made us so hopelessly reliant on the Americans. For example, to pressure the full repeal of C-69, the anti-pipeline and anti-energy law, the tanker ban, the energy cap, the industrial carbon tax, the plastics ban. All these things are really beating our economy to the ground and making us more dependent on the Americans. We need is a plan to bring home production and paychecks to this country, put Canada first. And that's one of the things that we think we could put on the table in immediate hearings on international trade at the committee.
You recently suggested that by cancelling the digital services tax, this was about 2 weeks ago, Mark Carney was putting his elbows down. Do you believe that Canada should have kept that tax in place?
I think the tax is a bad idea. I would have used it as a bargaining chip to get concessions in return.
Well, I should say, sir, we don't know,
for
right?
Example,
because the negotiations aren't public, we don't know whether Canada got anything back, right?
We don't know, but it tends to be a mistake to give the concession before you get one in return. Now, I agree with getting rid of the tax. It was a disastrous tax that would have made life more expensive for Canadians. but we have to negotiate to get an end to the softwood tariffs that came in under Obama, Biden, and now Trump, and that are hammering our forestry sector. We need an end to the Buy America policies that are killing construction jobs in Canada, an exemption that Mr. Harper got when he was Prime Minister. So far, Prime Minister Carney has not received any concessions. He hasn't made any headway, and I don't blame him entirely for that. Obviously, he's dealing with unfair treatment by the Americans, but we want to see some wins for Canada, and we have suggestions on how to get those wins, because really we have to put our country first, and that's what we're asking for.
I mean, you say he hasn't made any headway, and I would again say that may or may not prove to be the case because so much of this is happening away from the public eye. But I want to go back to what Donald Trump has just said.
If I could, on that point, just say, and I hope he does, I hope that you're right. I hope that there are some big wins for Canada. And I told Prime Minister Carney in our several conversations that Conservatives stand ready to help in any way we can, to reach out to lawmakers on the American side of the border, to offer suggestions and present a united Canadian front, because we really do hope that we get a good deal for all Canadians.
Are you doing that? Has he taken you up on that, or have you done that proactively?
So far, I have talked to numerous lawmakers and advocated for the Canadian position, but we haven't formally engaged in traveling to the U.S. at this point. But I told the Prime Minister that we as Canadian Conservatives, we put our country first, and we're prepared to work with anybody from any party to get a good deal for Canada.
Want to drop a few names for us, Mr. Poilievre? Who have you been speaking to?
Well, I spoke to Pete Sessions. He's a congressman from Texas. Spoke to a number of other congressmen who were in town for the Calgary Stampede in passing. We stand ready to do more if the Prime Minister wants us to help engage in the diplomatic process. We're happy to do it. One great way to do that is let's pull back the International Trade Committee and work together on getting the message out.
So I want to continue with this latest message from President Trump. He has said that Canada will face greater tariffs if we try to retaliate against a higher level of tariffs that he is proposing. Should those threats stop Canada from retaliation? Do we need to heed that warning?
I think we should try to get the deal done on the deadline, and that way we don't have to worry about tariffs that hurt both of our countries. I'm at a company right now in Stettler, Alberta, that has been said that they're paying the import tariffs that Canada is charging on some of the materials they put into their products. And we want to make sure that whatever tariffs that we counter with against the Americans do maximum impact on the American side of the border, minimal impact on the Canadian side. We should only be targeting things that we can make ourselves, that we can get from other countries, or that we don't ultimately need, so that we minimize the economic pain that Canadians pay for an act that, frankly, is not the fault of our people or our country.
You mentioned the deadline, and you talked about the fact that it has changed a few times. But fundamentally, Mark Carney said the purpose of this deadline is deadlines focus the mind. Was the deadline a good idea, sir, or did that put Canada on the back foot?
Well, the challenge with a unilateral self-imposed deadline is it tells the counterparty that they have you on a clock, and a clock that only applies to you. It's like if we're playing chess and on your side it's speed chess, and you have a clock on you have to watch while you're making your move, and I don't. Then I have a lot more ability to sit back and watch the board while you're watching the clock. And so I personally think it would have been better not to show that upfront to the Americans, because we know that President Trump will try to take advantage of it. That said, we do think that we do need to work to get this done as quickly as possible, because every passing day brings uncertainty and paralysis.
I just want to ask you one more thing about this trade situation. We can all see, and this is not necessarily new, but the president is quite hung up on Canada's supply management system. If that is ultimately where the deal hinges, if that's what's standing in the way of a deal, do you believe that Canada should be willing to give a little bit to allow Americans to sell more of their products here?
Well, what I would say to to our American friends is, are you willing to get rid of the tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of farm subsidies that the American taxpayer gives producers on their side of the border, and that ultimately present a disadvantage to our farmers. Our farmers have to compete with massive multi-billion-dollar subsidies on the American side that we don't get here. And so I do find it passing strange that the U.S. government would say that our farmers are somehow getting an unfair advantage. But I also don't think we should be making. I don't think we should be making, these kinds of proactive, unilateral concessions because that's not how you do a negotiation.
But is there any wiggle room, is what I want to understand from your point of view, because it's a very politically charged issue in Canada.
But there already has been wiggling. The last USMCA allowed for more market access by the Americans. I'm not even sure if the American producers are using the market access that Prime Minister Trudeau sacrificed. There's also been new penalties on Canadian exports of dairy in the prior USMCA. So I think that Canada has the Liberal government has made big concessions on this already. And the problem is they're not getting anything in return.
Well, I suppose the question of how big they are, your point to that in your answer, right? If the Americans aren't using them, perhaps the concessions ultimately weren't all that big. I guess we'll see where this conversation goes. I do want to ask you, though, before we let you go, we're reaching you in Alberta. You're there campaigning for the by-election in Battle River, Crowfoot.
It's a great place to be, back on the prairies.
Indeed. Well, listen, it does appear that we are heading towards a referendum on Alberta separation. When you are speaking to folks on the ground in the riding that you hope to win, are you telling them that they should remain part of Canada regardless of who is governing? I know you want to make the case for a Conservative government, but that referendum is likely to come sooner rather than later. Would you say to them they should stay even with Mark Carney in power?
They should stay in Canada.
Yes. Are you actively advocating
Yeah,
for
if you're asking me, absolutely. I'm advocating for a united Canada. And I say that on the doorstep. I say it when I'm in town halls. I say it every time it comes up. I said it at the Calgary Stampede. So I'm not being wishy-washy about this. I'm a Canadian. I'm a Canadian patriot. I'm proud that I grew up in southern Alberta, in Calgary, and I'm a very proud born and bred Albertan. Canada is my country. Canada is the country that the people in Battle River, Crowfoot call home. If you look around this community, the communities here, you will see the Canadian flag everywhere. It's on front lawns, it's on doorsteps, it's on people have Canadian flags on their pickup trucks. This is a very patriotic place, and I have, with no hesitation whatsoever, saying that Alberta should be part of Canada. And I should also say, though, the days of telling Alberta to pay up and shut up, to just send more and more money to Ottawa, while the Liberal government there blocks pipelines, destroys the energy sector, disrespects farmers, harms the economy, those days are over. We need to respect what Alberta is contributing. We need pipelines built. We need to repeal C-69, the anti-pipeline law, get rid of the tanker ban, the energy cap, the industrial carbon tax. We need to respect licensed firearms owners and farmers. Those are all things that can happen within a united Canada, and I pledge to be both a champion for fairness for Alberta and a united Canada for our entire country.
And indeed, many of those issues did come up in the last election, and you're in this by-election because you lost the Ottawa riding that you held for 2 decades. If you couldn't win your own riding, sir, why should people in Alberta and across the country give you a second chance?
Well, listen, the reality is we got 8.3 million votes across the country, 2.5 million more than we had in the prior election. We added 25 seats. We got the largest share of vote of a Conservative Party has had since 1988. So the answer is that the voice that I bring represents those 8 million plus people who believed in my message of fighting inflation, of getting affordable homes built, of locking up criminals, defeating drugs, unleashing our resources. Those are the messages, and those things mattered to those people. And I think that if you look at how the debate has changed in Canada as a result of the arguments and the causes that I've taken on, that voice has been very important to countless people, and it's a voice I want to amplify.
Then how do you make sense of the 4,513 votes that you lost by in your riding?
Well, the reality is it's a riding that is over. It was very simple. I was very clear that we would be cutting the federal bureaucracy if I was Prime Minister. And it was an Ottawa riding with a lot of federal public servants who disagreed with that approach. And they ran a very aggressive campaign, particularly the public sector unions did, to defeat me on that basis. Now, some people might say, well, it wasn't the best idea to run on a smaller federal public service when you're an Ottawa MP, but I had an entire country to represent, and I had to be honest with people. Like, I guess I could have done what the Liberals did, which is hide their plans, but I didn't do that. I said very clearly, we're going to have to eliminate federal public service jobs. That's the only way you bring down taxes and deficits. And I was honest about that, and the people in that particular constituency voted accordingly.
Okay. Mr. Poilievre, you have been generous with your time in the middle of this by-election. I appreciate it, and I hope you'll come back on the program. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the invite. All the very best.
You too. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. With Donald Trump lobbing fresh tariff threats Thursday evening, my next guest says this is now economic war, and it's time to fight back. Wesley Wark is a national security expert and a senior fellow with the Centre for International Governance Innovation. I spoke with him Friday morning. Wesley, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Catherine.
You say in the post that you wrote online that Trump's letter is a declaration of economic war, tantamount to that. Why is this a red line of sorts for you?
Well, I think the scale of the tariffs that he intends to oppose, so he says, we'll have to see, is the worst we've seen. It's a real escalation. I'm skeptical about some of the things that we've heard from unnamed White House officials that may be walked back a bit. Perhaps it'll only be tariffs on goods that are not compliant with the USMCA. Trump did not say that. Until he says that, I think we have to go with really the letter of his writing and his statements. He's long said, as you know, Catherine, that he doesn't think the United States needs anything from Canada. He has imposed all kinds of sectoral tariffs, as these are called, but this is the worst threat that he's made. And it, of course, comes on the eve of Prime Minister Carney's own kind of self-declared deadline for coming up with a comprehensive economic arrangement with the United States, but also a security partnership. And it's the security partnership that I think in particular we need to look at in terms of pushing back against the United States.
I really want to dig into what you're proposing in a minute, but I'd just like to take a moment to pause and reflect on something else in the letter. He points to, once again, this suggestion that fentanyl, he uses the word pouring. Fentanyl is pouring into the U.S. What do you make of the fact that that's a focal point, once again, for Donald Trump?
Well, it's hard to know whether, Trump has heard or listened to the evidence about that. The evidence is very clear that fentanyl is not pouring across the northern border into the United States. The U.S. has a problem with its southern border, but the problem is not Canada. And the evidence on that is very clear, and it's been presented time and time again by Canadian officials, from ministers down to our so-called fentanyl czar. Trump needs this canard, I call it, because it's the basis for him being able to legally apply these extraordinary executive emergency measures to declare a national security threat and impose tariffs on that basis. So whether or not he believes the claim, in essence, doesn't really matter. He needs to have the claim in order to uphold any level of tariffs against Canada. This is the subject of a court case in the United States. But again, we have to ask the extent to which the Trump administration is even prepared to abide by court rules in this regard.
Okay, let's focus a bit on the argument that you lay out for pushing back. You say rather clearly your expertise, national security, so that's what you focus on. You talk about areas from military relations, procurement, border security, diplomacy. So I want to dig into a few specifically. You say Canada could announce a review of the NORAD treaty. What's the case for doing that?
I think the case is simply to demonstrate to the United States that they cannot treat us as a kind of minor satellite or proxy to their desires. I sometimes think of this as the United States adopting a kind of People's Republic of China view of Canada. And the PRC has always said that Canada is nothing more than a satellite or, puppet of the United States. We are not. We have to make sure that the Americans understand that clearly. One of the key defense relationships we have with the United States is, of course, NORAD, which is longstanding. It's been around for 70 years. And it is meant to provide a collective defense of North American airspace and now maritime security as well. But the United States needs us as much as we need the United States in that defense pact.
As much?
As much, absolutely. The Trump administration, Donald Trump himself has said that, the United States pays for Canada's defense, that Canada does nothing for its own sake in its defense. This is simply untrue. And I think to hold up that threat, that, look, we're not going to continue to be a trusted security partner with the United States if we cannot trust them as an economic partner. That is the way I think we have to go.
But this is more about sending a signal than a concrete impact. That specific one, a review, right? You're not suggesting that result in anything more, that we're sending up some smoke signals that this is not the way things ought to be working.
So absolutely, Catherine, it's meant to be a smoke signal, but to create a smoke signal, you have to create some fire. And, I think if we have to contemplate the worst case, and the worst case being the imposition of high economic tariffs on Canada, a broken relationship with the United States, then one of the things that we have to step back from, and we'd have to do this incrementally, it is a treaty after all, we could step back from NORAD, and the onus would then be on us to defend our own borders and our own airspace.
You also argue that we could quietly limit our intelligence sharing, for example, limiting security clearances and access of U.S. officials to Canadian national security agencies. And this is something I found myself thinking when I looked at so many of the examples. When I think about intelligence sharing, I imagine that we depend on the U.S. very much for our intelligence. Can we really afford to pick a fight here?
We may have no choice. I mean, it wouldn't certainly be anything that we would do lightly or do as a matter of our own choosing. But again, the reality is, and it's a bit like the NORAD case, the reality is that while Canada gets an awful lot of intelligence, particularly on the global picture of international security threats, we get a lot from the United States. The United States has a massive intelligence community with all kinds of resources we don't have. Nevertheless, Canada supplies important intelligence to the United States, particularly in terms of signals intelligence, which is the long-standing input that has always maintained our security partnership on the intelligence front. With the Americans, that signals intelligence and other kinds of information that we provide has always been valued by American officials, even if it's not clear to an American president. Is that important? And again, I wouldn't broadcast this, but I think it would be another important signal to the United States that, well, okay, if you're going to proceed in this way, we're going to have to rethink our intelligence relationship, and we're going to look for new partners and strengthening existing partners outside the United States.
You make a lot of other very interesting and in some cases potentially provocative suggestions, like pulling our ambassador, having some strong words with the U.S. ambassador. But we only have a moment left. And what I want to ask you in closing is there a danger that we are giving Donald Trump what he wants if we do this, that we are, giving him the fight he is seeking? We're giving him a greater opportunity to kick Canada around and hit us with more tariffs?
It's a good question. It's certainly something that Trump has threatened, at least on the tariff front. I think the idea of sending these kinds of signals to the United States and planning in the background for a worst-case scenario, the idea is to recognize that we're in entirely uncharted, territory with the American administration, and that we have to be tough in response. And being tough in response is not just on the economic front. I think it really is on the national security front, and being tough on the national security front and getting through to, if not Donald Trump, at least officials around him, that Canada is really serious, that we will go our own way if we cannot trust the United States as a partner. That has huge implications for the United States in terms of its emphasis on homeland security and North American security. It would be a strong signal to the Americans, and I think it's an important negotiating tactic on Canada's behalf.
Okay, you have given us a lot to think about. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Catherine.
National security expert Wesley Wark. Lots more coming up on the House podcast. Can Mark Carney cut government spending without major layoffs? Two former insiders give us their takes. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House, making politics make sense. Be sure to give us a follow so you never miss an episode, and tell us what you think of the show. You can email us at thehouse@cbc.ca.
On the eve of its 100th anniversary, the RCAF will see its first women commander of the Royal Canadian Air Force.
On Thursday, Lieutenant General Jamie Spicer-Blanchette took command of the Air Force, stepping into the role as Canada's national defence gets billions more in spending power, but also as the world seems increasingly uncertain. After the change of command, I spoke to the Lieutenant General about this moment, whether Canada should still be buying all its new fighter jets from the U.S., and, in light of members of the military being arrested on terrorism-related charges this week, whether the armed forces is doing enough to combat extremism. And just a heads up, you might notice a little interruption towards the end of this interview. A member of the Air Force communications team did try to stop one of our questions, but as you'll hear, we just kept going. Lieutenant General Jamie Spicer-Blanchette, congratulations. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you very much.
You are taking on this role at a time of such dramatic change. Canadians are more willing than ever to invest in the military. That is perhaps because there are fears that the United States is less reliable, that people are more awake to the dangers in the world. How do you feel about the moment that you are stepping into?
Well, it is indeed a very pivotal moment in Canadian history, especially when it comes down to defense spending and what you've just mentioned in terms of Canadians being able to or willing to invest in defense. I would say that the threat environment is one that is changing very rapidly, and Canadians have had the luxury of feeling secure for many decades for good reasons, but that environment is changing, and so new technologies, new threats, hypersonic threats, more access from the Arctic, from all over. These are coming from adversaries with evolving technologies, and so we need to be ready to counter those threats. And the reason that we need to have them and be capable is so that we can actually deter them from taking action. So this is a very interesting time, I find, and it's just one characterized by a lot of uncertainty and a lot of activity going on at the same time.
What is the number one thing that you want to do in this role? I'm sure there's a long list, but number one.
Yes. I am really focused on enabling our members to successfully go through a significant transformation. I see the human side of what is happening, and we have amazing members. It's our people and their professionalism and their resilience and their tenacity that always gets us through everything. The demands on them right now, in a time when society is just so volatile and uncertain, it's creating an area where any change is hard. So I'm really focused on allowing them, enabling them, I think would be a better word, to really institutionalize the new capabilities and things we have. And it's going to require leadership at every level and really thinking differently. When I think of the technology and the things that we're bringing on, it's so much more than just aircraft and some of the systems. It's digital transformation, it's cyber technology and different things that we're really not used to from many years in my career. So it's just a very new environment. I want to bring our people through that.
In order for the members of the military to succeed, they need the right equipment. We have certainly heard stories about some of the challenges around that, including the Air Force. Our colleague Murray Brewster reported this past spring that only 40% of Canada's Air Force fleet is considered serviceable and ready to fight. How are you going to fix that?
So some of those statistics are not as black and white as they appear, in the sense that, yes, we do have unserviceable aircraft, but how we measure the unserviceability and the output is not as linear as it may appear. So I guess the first point is the capabilities that we do have in the aircraft that we do have flying and the things that we have our personnel doing it's not as dire as perhaps that paints it. Now, that said, we have to keep a focus on enabling our members, giving them the right training, and making sure that they're organized properly, in addition to being equipped. And so that requires a focus on training, a focus on making sure that even if they're doing operations, that there's a development of their knowledge and skill sets. So we're really focusing across the board on all of those areas. And I think that with time, with the new capabilities, with what we're doing with the training system, and more people coming in, that we will eventually see those numbers rise.
Beyond, when we think of equipment, certainly we think about the new fighter jets. Where are we in terms of the review that the government is doing right now? I know there's a hope that that's going to be completed this summer.
Yes, well, we're waiting for the government to finalize the review. There has been input. We have worked very hard within the Department of Defense and others to provide facts, and now we're just waiting to understand what the next steps are from the government.
Okay, so from your point of view, the work is done in terms of the Air Force?
The discussions are still happening, so nothing's finalized yet. However, we have been providing and contributing. And in the meantime, we are also continuing on all of our efforts to continue with the F-35 project based on existing commitments.
With the U.S. planes, the F-35s, as you just mentioned, the U.S. has control of software upgrades as well as spare parts. Does that give you pause, given what's going on?
So it doesn't, and here's why. The F-35 is not a direct contract with the United States. The F-35 acquisition or project is a memorandum of understanding. It's actually a club, if you will, of 8 nations that have all signed a memorandum of understanding. And so the decisions that go into the aircraft, which are being modernized and sort of updated, on a very routine basis, are not done alone by the U.S. It is a very important partnership. And so that's a nuance that is a little bit unusual, I think, in procurement circles and perhaps not as well understood. But that does create a little bit of a difference.
What I hear you saying is we don't need to worry about the Americans and the control they have if we continue to purchase all of the 88 F-35s.
I do not worry about that.
Okay, so the flip side of it is if we were, though, to go look at European planes, for instance, to fulfill that whole order, that is 2 training and supply systems, building separate hangars potentially, and infrastructure. Does that make sense for the Air Force?
So I'm not sure I'm able to comment on that right now. We did look at those aircraft. There was a competitive process that is very open and available, and we are very focused right now with the limited resources we have on dealing with our current mandate. So I would say that unless that changes, that's really where we have to keep our focus.
I want to switch gears a bit and ask you a bit about personnel. This week, we heard about 4 men, including 2 active members of the military, who had been charged related to an anti-government plot that involved a massive...
This isn't related.
Yeah, sorry, Jill. It is a broader question about the state of the military. It involved a massive trove of weapons. The week before that, this relates to the Army. We heard about a Facebook group that was accused of featuring racist, misogynistic, homophobic, and anti-Semitic comments. How can the armed forces writ large do a better job of tackling hate within its own ranks?
I think we're doing a lot of work to tackle all of these issues because it is well understood that this behavior is not acceptable, and the actions, as soon as anything is discovered of this nature, immediate actions are taken. And I know that the Canadian Army is doing everything they can at the moment to continue on working with the Provost Marshal in the investigations. We are already putting in place a lot of measures, and it's about leadership, and it is about continuing to communicate with our members and ensure that everyone understands what is appropriate, what is not, and just making sure we create that inclusive environment.
In closing, I want to ask you about something that you referenced, which is the incredible influx of spending that we are expecting for Canada's armed forces. I mean, when we look at that 5% of GDP, yes, it's years in the future, but that is an incredible amount of money. It's 3 times what we spend on federal health transfers right now. And so I wonder, there are Canadians who are struggling to get by. What would you say to them about why investing in Canada's military in such a dramatic way is the right thing to do?
So I would offer that the 5% is more about national security than it is about specifically the Canadian Armed Forces or the Department of National Defence. Though there is a significant amount, and we're focused on the 2% in the near term, and then an increase to 3.5 and then 5 longer term, as you mentioned. I would offer that Canadians really should feel the importance that security actually provides to our sovereignty, to our economy, to their lifestyle. National security and the protection of the continent from real threats that adversaries have is actually something that will underpin their economic prosperity and their feeling of security at home.
Again, congratulations, Lieutenant General. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you very much.
That was my conversation on Thursday with the new head of the Air Force, Lieutenant General Jamie Spicer-Blanchet. A major change took place on Parliament Hill this week, but you'd be forgiven if you missed it. The Prime Minister's new Chief of Staff, Marc-Andre Blanchard, officially started his job, as did the new Clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Sabia. These are the powerful people at the top of the government machine, and they've got their work cut out for them, with major cuts in government program spending planned and a push to get action on the Prime Minister's goals. How hard will it be to pull that off? And what does it take to succeed in these high-pressure jobs, particularly in the time of Trump? Let's ask two people who have been there. Janice Charette is the former clerk of the Privy Council under Justin Trudeau and Stephen Harper, part of a 4-decade career in the public service. She was also part of Mark Carney's transition team. Ian Brodie is a former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. These days, he's a professor at the University of Calgary and a senior advisor with New West Public Affairs. I spoke with them both Thursday afternoon. Great to have you both on the House.
Thanks for inviting us, Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.
So, Ian, a new Chief of Staff, a new clerk, both of whom, interestingly, have spent a fair amount of time in the private sector. Plus, we've got a Prime Minister in a hurry. How big a shift does this moment represent for government?
I think it is a big shift. It's not just that the external environment of government is challenging here. There's the Trump challenge. There's, I think, fiscal challenges both in the United States and in Canada. And then there's kind of 10 years of pent-up demand for economic growth and for some kind of economic activity in Canada. But, of course, Mr. Carney's, in a sense, new to the political world, at least from the political side of the political world. He's not new to government, not new to politics, but he's new to political leadership. And although I think he has a very strong position in the House of Commons, nothing particularly to worry about. It's not quite as strong as it could have been if he'd had a majority government. He's got a bunch of cabinet ministers trying to get used to him and in some cases trying to get used to each other. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to make a big change to the government agenda. That's a very tall order, a very tall set of orders, and he's got a new team to try to get into shape. Okay,
so let's zoom in for a moment on these roles. Janice, a lot of folks probably don't understand what being the clerk of the Privy Council means. How would you sum it up?
So it's a kind of an arcane title, isn't it? But it has mainly 3 roles. The deputy minister to the prime minister. Every minister in the cabinet has a deputy minister, and the prime minister has a deputy minister as well, responsible for being in charge of the Privy Council office. And every file of any import that's on the Prime Minister's desk is on the desk of the Clerk of the Privy Council. Second, you're the Secretary to the Cabinet. So it's kind of like running the Board of Directors of Canada, where the Prime Minister's in the chair and the Cabinet Ministers are around the table. So you're responsible for supporting the decision-making system, how government gets to decisions. And then the Clerk really is responsible for trying to take those decisions and implementing them through the public service. And then third, the head of the public service, the most senior public servant in the country, the deputy minister of all deputies, primus inter pares, we call it, first among equals, and responsible for the long-term sustainability, viability of the institution of the nonpartisan professional public service.
Ian, Janice talks about being nonpartisan. Of course, being a chief of staff is a partisan role. So help us understand that role compared to what the clerk does.
Yeah, in a certain sense, they're complementary roles at that level. The Privy Council office and the clerk's staff are quite a bit larger and have quite a bit more reach than the Prime Minister's office staff, which is minuscule by comparison. But the complement allows the Chief of Staff and the Prime Minister's office staff to focus on the explicitly partisan future of the government. So that means helping manage cabinet, including the careers of cabinet ministers, keeping an eye ahead to promoting and demoting people who might be up for retirement and so forth, keeping track to make sure that your best talent is in the top priority jobs that Janice referred to, and then managing the Prime Minister's time. There's only so many hours in the day. Mr. Carney seems like a workhorse. I think most prime ministers are. But that doesn't mean there's infinite amounts of time. You want to make sure that he is delegating to other ministers and to other officials important matters of state that nonetheless aren't probably worth his limited time, and keeping him focused on the matters that the government absolutely has to deliver on in order to deliver its political success in time for the next election and the ones after that.
Janice, a lot has been said about how Mark Carney is running this government, right, as CEO style and whatnot. Because you worked with him on the transition team, I wonder if there's a little piece of insight you could offer us into what it means to be the prime minister at the top of the whole government trying to make all these big changes at this moment.
Well, they say that tone starts from the top, right? And so I think Prime Minister Carney is bringing his vast amount of experience and incredible resume to the task of being Prime Minister of Canada at a time when the stakes are pretty high. And so I see him as someone who is very focused on the agenda. He, for example, set out a single mandate letter for all of his ministers with 7 priorities and expects that ministers within their departments are going to figure out how they fit into that agenda as opposed to having a much larger number of priorities. He's acting with urgency. I mean, he's been the Prime Minister for less than 2 months already, and we've already seen a pretty serious record of achievements and accomplishments. A lot of things got started. I think he's demonstrating change. You see that in the style of governing as much as in the substance of it. But results is, I think, where we're going to, but it's 2 months. So.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm interested then, given your experience as clerk, what happens when Mark Carney's high standards, level of ambition intersect with the machine of government? I mean, what is the big challenge there?
Well, one of the reasons you asked me to come on is to talk about the fact that we have a new clerk of the Privy Council as well as of Monday. Michael Sabia started in the role, and he sent out a note to all public servants on Monday, and he talked about his 3 priorities in his job: focus, simplify processes, and reinforcing accountability. And so I think it's interesting just how aligned the clerk and the Prime Minister's agendas are. Not a surprise there. It's really up to the clerk to then work to make sure that the public service is delivering on the agenda of the government. I said to nonpartisan public service. That doesn't mean we're not, we are very loyal to the government of the day. We are in the business of fearless advice and loyal implementation. And so that's what the task ahead.
But is it a bit of an uphill battle? Is I guess what I'm wondering, because there has been this suggestion that perhaps I think the Globe used this term, one of their sources, that analysis paralysis might have overtaken parts of the public service, and there was going to require a real shift.
Well, I think that's the tone from the top point, right? Mm-hmm. If you have 7 priorities, that's different than having 700 priorities. And so that 7 priorities allows the public service really to focus their advice. And I think very clear feedback around, yes, analysis is important, but actually get to the bottom line, get to recommendations, stand behind them, have that accountability in terms of the advice you're giving. And then once you have a decision, you get out there and you actually make it happen. Implementation really matters. It's not enough to have a nice announcement. It's about actually change that Canadians can see. And that matters to public servants too. Public servants take a lot of pride in actually delivering results for Canadians. And a government that is prepared to work with the public service to allow them to do their best job, I think, is a very good basis for a constructive relationship.
Ian, part of getting that job done, though, also has to do with government spending. And this week, the government made it clear they're looking for major reductions in that spending. 7.5% in the fiscal year that begins in April, 10% the year after that, 15% the year after that. How hard is it going to be to not just identify, which is the stage we're in now, but to make those, you can call them savings or cuts fundamentally?
Yeah, I think those were the 2 interesting messages from the centre this week. One, Mr. Sabia's message, which was, in a sense, an upbeat one, almost optimistic. And although I agree with Janice's assessment, it completely lacked a sense of urgency about the fiscal side of the government. On the other side was this set of instructions about spending plans and deregulation plans. Look, the United States, I think we can see, is headed towards some very difficult fiscal times. I don't know exactly what a debt crisis looks like when you're the world's issuing currency and you're running a 6% borrowing requirement of GDP every year, but it's not good. It's running a very quick borrowing program that's crowding other issuers out of the market. The need to get the fiscal situation under control in Ottawa after a long period of really national economic weakness, kind of 5 years of pretty slow shrinking economy with a growing federal government, and then this massive hiring binge in the federal public service workforce and the consulting workforce of the federal government. The turn of the big aircraft carrier of government spending is going to have to be very quick. And I expect that although Mr. Sabia's message is an interesting one, the one that's really going to cause change, if there's going to be any change at all, is the big budget cutting exercise, which will have to come necessarily with a reversal of this huge hiring binge of the federal public service over the last 10 years.
Well, and let's be clear about that. Is it, in your estimation, does that involve a significant number of people losing their job? Like they've said that the money is not going to come from transfers or taking away social programs, things like dental care. So are there going to be fewer folks in the government at the end of this exercise?
Well, I know that's the federal government's message right now, but in fairness, we're in the kind of the pre-debt crisis phase of the economic planning here. If the worst case scenario does happen, I think that's a strong possibility that the Americans have a debt crisis and then we have a debt crisis. There'll be nothing but a very serious set of cutbacks in federal spending and some very large job losses. Yes, I mean, we went through an election campaign where both of the major parties sort of pretended this wasn't coming, but I think we all know it was.
Janice, what do you think about that?
Well, in the election campaign, as Ian said, Prime Minister Carney, then the candidate, talked about a cap on the size of the public service. You know, ministers and deputy ministers right now are turning their attention to the instructions that they've been given to identify opportunities for savings. And so we'll have to see exactly what deputies and ministers come up with. There has been a tremendous growth in the size of the public service. That wasn't because, like, the public service, decided to eat a lot of cake. It was because actually there was a lot of demands on the public service that ramped up, especially during COVID, but we didn't see a decline after that. So the public service has been doing a lot of things and doing a lot of things quickly. There are huge opportunities, I believe, for the implementation of digital tools, of the use of artificial intelligence. There's a lot of ways to actually kind of increase the value added per public servant. But in order to actually stop spending requires some tough decisions, and that could actually have workforce implications. And I think some departments have already kind of put employees on notice that could be coming.
In closing, Ian alluded to this, Janice, but we have not actually really talked about Donald Trump yet, because there's all this ambition, and then there is the Donald Trump factor hanging over all of this. How does that complicate Mark Carney's task?
Well, I think it means that job one for the Prime Minister has to be managing that relationship with the President. It's very clear that all decisions coming out of the United States right now come from the President of the United States, and the only person who can deal with him has to be the Prime Minister. And so there's volatility there, there's unpredictability there. The Prime Minister has tried to put a pretty rational approach here, I think, on the table, a comprehensive new security and economic relationship with the United States. But this has got to be right at the top of Mr. Carney's job jar. And that takes the full support of both of those two new players that we've talked about here today, the Chief of Staff, Marc-André Blanchard, and the Clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Sabia. He's very well equipped with those two very professional, accomplished individuals by his side.
Ian, lightning fast, last thought from you here?
I think the Trump situation makes Mr. Carney's job quite a bit easier. Mr. Carney's on a holiday from public opinion until at least Christmas, and probably for another year or year and a half. Whatever comes out of his dealings with Trump, he'll be hailed as a hero for the country still existing at the end of it. And whatever downsides there might be, if he has some big structural changes to make in the Canadian economy, he can blame it on Trump and go up in the polls. So I think the dealings with Trump will be a political advantage for him, no matter how difficult the decisions are. He's going to be hailed as a hero no matter what happens, and it puts all of the other parties that are contesting for power on their back heel.
Thank you both for this conversation. Appreciate you both pulling back the curtain a bit for us.
Good to talk together.
Thanks, Catherine.
Ian Brody and Janice Charette. Okay, that is it for us this week. Our crew on the House is Emma Godmere, Benjamin Lopez-Steven, and our senior producer this week is Kristen Everson. I'm Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.